Hello, everyone. Welcome back to I See What You're Saying, the Disciplined Listening Podcast. I'm Michael Reddington, and today it is my pleasure to welcome our next guest, Michael deLisser. Michael has over 20 years of leadership development experience, and he has educated and coached thousands of leaders. He's also the author of Leadership Accelerators, High Impact Communication Skills that Strengthen Relationships and Drive Results. And in this conversation, we're going to dive into not only the thesis and topics from that book, but plenty of examples from his experience, the clients that he's worked with, what he's learned through his research, and what his clients have taught him as well. A great place to start the conversation is where we talk about the difference between self-awareness and self-perception. He's also going to share techniques for improving how we receive feedback, examples for how we can turn data into insights, and great examples for how we can influence others through the questions that we ask. That's a phenomenal conversation. I appreciate Michael sharing all of his time and expertise, and I really appreciate all of you being here for another week and another episode. Thank you so very much. While you're here, please just take a quick second, like the episode, share it with your network. Please subscribe, and of course, leave us your feedback. We would love to hear from you. And while you're online today, take a quick minute to check out our sponsors. Head over to humantel.com. You can look over their research, read their articles, and get all your questions answered for how you can begin to learn the skill of identifying when people's emotions are likely shifting based on evaluating real-time changes in their facial expression, verbal communication. Choose the online training of your course and enter the code INQUASIVE25 for 25% off the training of your choice. I've done them all. I highly recommend it. For the professional interviewers, please head over to certifiedinterviewer.com. That's where you can get all your questions answered for both the Certified Forensic Interviewer designation and the International Association of Interviewers. That's all at certifiedinterviewer.com. And finally, while you're online today, please check out inquasive.com. That's where you can learn more about the programs our clients ask us to custom facilitate for their senior leaders, their sales team, their HR team, and more to learn how to uncover hidden value in all of their high impact conversations. We really appreciate you being here for another week. Thank you so very much. So now without further ado, I introduce to you, Michael deLisser. Hello, Michael. It is so great to meet you. How are you?
Doing great. Thanks for having me on.
Oh, it's my pleasure. I really appreciate you taking the time to join us. I'm excited to dive into the conversation. And when I was doing my research to get ready, there were a few times I was like, oh, that's where we're going to go. That's where we're going to go. So even just trying to pick the place to start was a bit of an adventure for me. But for us to hit the ground running right away, I would like to try to pry open a box that I know you spend a lot of time with in your work every day, based on your research, your experience, the work that you do day in and day out with your clients. What do you see as some of the highest impact communication skills necessary for driving results?
Well, and quite honestly, I mean, that was the reason why I wrote the book I did, is because it focused on those three things that you just asked about. But in a nutshell, throughout my career, I've seen a very consistent pattern of people getting themselves into trouble the higher they go in an organization based on ineffective communication skills, right? And even when I was a kid, I watched my father coaching. He was an executive coach for people that had been fired, and watching him coach all these people that have been fired because of their lack of communication skills. So as you move up in an organization, the three things that really are going to make you stand out, particularly in the world of AI, where more and more of your technical skills are getting replaced, it's your ability to demonstrate emotional intelligence. The higher you go in the organization, the more critical it becomes you develop that, because your job becomes more and more getting results through others as opposed to doing the work yourself. The second thing is having high self-awareness of your communication habits. And I can spend a lot of time teaching people new communication techniques, but more often than not, there's one or two ineffective habits that they developed very early in life, and they either have no awareness of, or it's holding them back in some regard. And so I coach them on overcoming what those communication habits are. And we could talk more about that as we go through it. Right. And then the third thing is having a true understanding of how it's about self-awareness. All of this is about self-awareness, but having high self-awareness in particular about how your personality needs drive your ability to be effective in your role and effective in your relationships. And if you can develop really high self-awareness and skill in those three areas, those are the difference makers that make great leaders stand out as opposed to just being an average leader. So those are the three things that I spend the most time on.
And that makes total sense. Three focus areas. The emotional intelligence one, I'm sure we can circle back to. But when I started hearing you talk about high levels of self-awareness, there's a whole conversation there about helping people generate higher levels of self-awareness. And some people think they have it and don't. Some people just don't have it at all. I'd love to come back to that. But you mentioned it, some of the habits that you see people develop that are ineffective, and they probably have blind spots. They don't really realize that they're doing it. So through all of your experience working with your clients, what are some of the more common ineffective habits that you see leaders developing that are counterproductive?
Yeah, and actually, since you brought it up, people think they have higher self-awareness. In the book, I referred to some research that talks about 95% of people think they're self-aware, but really only about 15% are, right? And so that's the problem to begin with, is we all think we know more about ourselves than we do. But with that in the background, as you think about, sorry, repeat the question one more time. I'm sorry.
Just the ineffective habits that you've seen people develop over time.
Thanks. Sorry about that.
So you're good.
The habits I see the most are the same ones that I've seen people get fired for, which is usually something they developed early in life, something like constantly interrupting others or cutting people off and finishing their sentences. Having emotional outbursts at the wrong time, not handling the difficult conversations the right way. And that goes back to the emotional intelligence piece. A lot of times it can be really ineffective context, like ineffective running a meeting or ineffective giving a presentation or just saying the wrong things because your personality type is really blunt and you just blurt things out without filtering them, things like that. So I could go on. I literally have self-assessments that I use that identify the 15 most common habits that you'll see, but they usually all come down to something we learn earlier in life, and we have those blind spots, as you refer to.
Yeah, I really believe, and I could be wrong, I haven't seen any research to back this up, so warning, Mike's opinion coming here, right? But perhaps the biggest problem with communication is we're all taught to communicate as children by adults who treat us like children. And then we grow up to become adults. We have to talk to other adults, but we were only ever taught to speak to kids. And then we start talking to other adults like kids, and that doesn't go well, and we don't understand why, so we blame them. It can't be our fault. This whole thing falls apart. And I feel like there's like you said, things we develop when we're young that we don't even realize. The interrupting piece, I think, is a real important one to go back to. One of the things that makes me laugh, I guess inside, because if I did it outside, it would be really rude, is I can't tell you how many times somebody cuts me off to tell me what a great listener they are. Like the unintentional irony of that moment. Let me speak over you to tell you what a great listener I am. Oh, well done. I appreciate the effort. From your perspective and your experience working with so many people over so many years, what do you think are some of the drivers that cause people to interrupt? Because I'd be willing to bet, as I ruin my own question, I'll repeat it again, I promise. But I'd be willing to bet that if you polled most leaders, what shouldn't you do when you're talking to other people, interrupting would make almost every list. Like we all know we're not supposed to do it, but yet people do it. So to repeat the question I shouldn't have cannibalized 30 seconds ago, why do you believe so many people are compelled to interrupt so often?
You hit it on the head when you first started the conversation, when you said, our parents and how but you have to have a license to drive a car, and you have to pass a test before you do that. There is no license for raising kids. You just have them. And so if your role models before you were not very effective at communicating, you're going to pass those bad habits on to your kids as well. A lot of times when I'm sitting down with an executive that's gotten into trouble for interrupting his boss or customers or whatever it is, when I sit down and I talk through it with them, I say, where do you think this habit came from? I mean, you don't get born with this. This is something you develop. And the most classic answer that I hear commonly is, oh, well, that's how we communicated as a family, right? I had lots of kids in the family. If we wanted attention at the dinner table, we'd interrupt each other, and it just worked. But you bring that into the workplace and it doesn't work, and you don't even realize you're doing it because it was normal for you growing up. So it's one of those things that half the battle is knowing what are the communication habits we picked up from our families. And it's either families or role models or people that we spend the most time with that'll influence the most. And if you can have an awareness of what are those things that are holding you back and where they came from, then you can do something about it. keep in mind also that there are some good habits we get from our families too, and you want to be able to leverage those and know what those are as well. So it's a balancing act. But the majority of the time, it's something we learned early in life. We've been doing it for decades. And because of that, if you don't work on it every single day, you're going to have a hard time getting rid of it because you've been developing this over decades. And now you're at a point where it's not just going to go away until you learn to replace it habitually with something more effective. And you have to start by catching yourself in the moment of doing it and replacing it with something more effective.
Agree totally. And I got something I'd like to circle back and follow up there, but one more thought on interrupting, at least one more. I guess we'll see where we go. I've always wondered how much in every situation, every person is different. Let's get that caveat out there, of course. How much of interrupting is driven by fear? I'm afraid I'll forget my point. I'm afraid that we'll get beyond this. I'm afraid that you won't respect me. I'm afraid that you will go do something I don't want to do. I'm afraid I'm going to run out of time. And you mentioned, I'm sure we could go a top 15 list of reasons why people interrupt. But I'm curious through the conversations you've had, what role, even beyond sort of that operational conditioning that some of us have growing up, that fear comes into the need to interrupt others.
Yeah, and throughout our lives, we also learn. I don't know that. I think fear is a factor in some of the cases. A lot of times, it's ego as well.
Yeah.
And we're we feel like we need to show how smart we are, and that might be driven by a fear of not looking smart. There could be underlying fears that lead to those behaviors, but more often than not, it's our ego. More often than not, it's just automatic responses that we're not thinking, and we've done it for so long we haven't really gotten an awareness that we are cutting people off because we've done it for decades. But I do think underlying it might be fear. A lot of times particularly in group settings, if someone has a strong need to show their value because they have some sort of insecurity, they'll do those behaviors because they feel like they have to show it. Now, what happened in their life that led them to feel like they have to show it? Who knows? But it could be based on a fear of a past bad experience, and now I have to prove to everyone that I don't have this issue. So, but yeah, a lot of people. To your point, I mean, we all have blind spots, right? And there's a difference between self-awareness and self-perception. And more often than not, we walk around with self-perception. This is what I think I know about myself. But if you're not out there asking other people and getting feedback and verifying that their opinions are in alignment with yours about how you're coming across, that's when you get true self-awareness. And most people don't spend enough time doing that.
I love what I just heard. There's a difference between self-awareness and self-perception. That is a fantastic statement. I love how you said it, how you described it. I think that's great. And also, you mentioned this concept of asking for feedback. And I love your thoughts. Correct me anywhere you think I stray from the path on this, please. You'll never hurt my feelings. But I feel like generating a true level or true-ish level of self-awareness really can only come through feedback. And some of that is asking for it directly. And some of it is being in tune to how are people acting around you or reacting around you in certain scenarios, meetings, conversations, whatever it might be. What's the correlation that you see between people who actually begin to develop self-awareness and those who legitimately are open to receiving critical feedback?
I think part of it has to be developing a comfort level with yourself and a willingness to know that every opportunity of feedback, no matter how it comes out of the other person's mouth, is an opportunity to improve. If you use it to improve, right? Whether it's good feedback or bad feedback, it doesn't matter. What matters is what you do with it once you get it, So, part of the challenge is when people are not comfortable getting feedback or they're defensive when they get feedback, that goes back to the learned behaviors from earlier in life, right? Something has happened that caused you to feel like you have to defend yourself. And could have been from family conflict, could have been from bad experiences in previous jobs. It could be a number of things. But you have to get beyond the idea that if someone criticizes you, that's a bad thing. It's a mindset shift to saying, I want to learn everything I can on how I'm being perceived, because once I know that, I can do something different about it. And so if you go in with a mindset of all feedback is a gift, and I need to get feedback to be better, that's when you start to get to true self-awareness. And look, if you don't respond well to feedback or feel like you have to justify yourself when you get it, you'll never get additional feedback. You'll convince those people, I don't feel safe giving this person feedback. So you have to go into it. Sometimes I tell people, go into it with a consultant mindset. The feedback's not about you. It's you're the person gathering the feedback to give it to the person who needs it. And then later, after you've heard all the feedback, you can reattach to it in private and kind of make sure you understand it's about you. But anything you can do to manage your emotional reactions is critical. And the great leaders, the ones when I do 360 reviews with leaders and they get and they're going through the results, they are hungry to hear everything. They're looking for what their weaknesses are. There's no fear in getting that feedback because they know that that's what's going to cause them to improve. Even if they disagree with the feedback, if someone else has the perception, it's reality for the other person. So if you can do something to change their perception, that's another opportunity to improve. So the worst thing in the world you could do is have a perfect 360 review and everyone says you're great at everything because you don't learn as much. And we all, you go in knowing, if you go in knowing my ideas are not always going to be the best ones, and my ideas get better when I incorporate other people's opinions who think differently than me, that's when you start to get your ideas to be really powerful because you're coming out from your blinders and you're starting to get other perspectives of people that see the issue differently.
Yeah, and to get back to some of your previous comments about things we've learned in life and ego and fears, that's easier for some than it is for others. But I love how you talked about really initially disassociating ourselves from the feedback that we receive. So yeah. I'm actually collecting all of this feedback to package it up and give it to myself later. I think that's a fantastic concept and in a real unique way to look at it, to try to at least compartmentalize some of those emotions or let the emotions run their course without letting them interfere what happens next. I don't know how you feel about this. I feel like I don't feel like it's been an experience with some of the folks that I've worked with. We're not telling people how to think or what to feel. Like if you hear something you don't like and it upsets you, that's valid. That's fine. It makes you feel upset, but that's got to run its course before we can then turn this into something productive. So if we can stay outcome focused and let the emotion run its course, then we can take positive action. And I think that technique of disassociating yourself initially from the feedback, you're gathering it to represent it, is a fantastic approach to doing that. I really like that a lot.
Yeah, and emotional intelligence is not about shutting your emotions down. It's about understanding them and learning to project them in more effective ways, right? And understanding what triggers you and being able to manage that trigger to a level that you can respond in a way that doesn't cause a negative reaction on the other side, right? And so somewhere in that process, you have to, in your brain, be able to understand. And then look, early in our careers, most of us struggle with the emotional intelligence because we all want to think that our ideas are the best ones in the world. I can tell you, as someone who custom builds leadership development programs for all levels of leaders, never once in my career have I put together a training of any kind that was as powerful as one where I incorporated ideas I deliberately sought out ideas from people that thought differently from me. Because, when you go back to personality types, I'm a people person and I'm an information-driven person and I like to give a lot of detail. But a lot of the executives I train are either very results driven or very structured. And those are two areas that I'm weaker in. So if I'm putting together a training, I will go out and find the most results driven person I can and the most structured person I can and have them poke holes in my training. And it always makes my training better. And so when people can understand that it's not that your strengths are going to be great, but in some contexts, they could be a weakness if they're too strong. And if you have an area where you're not strong, finding other people that are strong in that makes your arguments better, makes your results better, because you have to let go of the idea of your ideas are the best ideas, and you have to start to say my ideas always get better when I incorporate people that think differently from me.
Oh, for sure. And that approach is fantastic. It is intentionally seeking out the people who have the strengths or the stronger opinions or the perspectives that can balance, maybe not even balance out where we don't have it, but change the weight distribution based on their opinion versus ours. So it doesn't even have to be a complete balance. You mentioned personality types. And I'm sure you probably use personality tests a lot. I'm sure you get asked about personality tests a lot. I feel like personality tests can be a double-edged sword when it comes down to developing self-awareness. I'm curious what your experience has been incorporating personality tests to help and how they either help people generate self-awareness on how they're impacting others or how they just help people reinforce, damn it, this is who I am and everyone else needs to understand.
You're hitting right on the head of one of the biggest challenges. People misuse the results of their personality assessments, you know. And so, first of all, the first misconception is, oh, well, I lead with results-driven energy, so I'm blunt, and you just have to, deal with it, right? Well, you can have that attitude, but in certain contexts, it's going to hurt you and hurt your results, right? So if you're results-driven, taking a moment to be a little more people-focused and in the way you present it actually will get you a better result and decrease the amount of resistance you get, right? So, and one of the challenges, people get a personality test, they say, okay, this labels who I am. Like for me, my lowest score on personality tests is always in structure. Whichever personality type is around structure, I do very low in. But we all have the ability to be structured when we need to be. When I'm putting together an executive training, I will go through it with a structure mindset. After I've built it, I'll go through and where is there missing logic? Where does it not flow well? Where am I not having the right evidence, right? And all those things. But I'm capable of being structured as I need to be. It's just more draining when you do that, when you dial up one of the energies you're not as strong in. So half of the problem is when people get the results, they're like, oh, I am this. No, we're a combination of all these personality types. And you lead with that one. But if you know that, you can dial it down in situations where it might be overwhelming for people that don't lead with that. You can dial it up in situations where you don't have enough of something, or you can tap into your resources and people around you and get that extra feedback. But when you look at team results, if you have a team that's too heavy in any one personality type, I can predict for you what kind of mistakes they're going to make. Because whichever one they're missing in is going to be an issue, and whichever one their strongest one is going to be an issue. And so I can very regularly, when I work with executive teams, predict what they're going to tell me about their issues before, just by seeing the team results. And so if you are using personality tools the right way, you are using them to understand how does these results impact my relationships with this person and differently with this person, and how are their personalities different. And so, and you never need to change who you are. But in the moments that matter, in those toughest conversations where you need to have a great outcome and the stakes are high, that's when you can adapt and start to dial up an energy that you know the other person has. To me, it's the equivalent of if you were French and I was, speaking English, and I spoke a little bit of French and we were having a miscommunication, I might flip to French to make it easier for you to understand me. Well, if you're results driven and I'm people driven, and I'm giving too much people, I can dial up my results drive just like I would speaking more French, because what it does is it gives me a chance to make it easier for you to understand me. So in key moments, you want to dial up those energies, but you also have to be true to who you are and leverage your strengths when you can.
All fantastic points. And that is, I believe you would have to tell me because I'm stealing your phrase now. That's a great illustration of the difference between self-perception and self-awareness.
Yeah.
Self-perception is this is who I am. I'm just blunt. Everyone's got to deal with it if they want to work here. Well, congratulations. Let me know how well that works out for you. Self-awareness is realizing, okay, I am results driven and I can be blunt. But if results really are the most important thing, then shouldn't I be using the path that's most likely to get me to the results that I want instead of trying to force it to be done the way, the speed, how I want them to be done? So I think that's a great illustration of what you said earlier, the self-perception versus the self-awareness. Question I was going to ask just escaped my mind. I'm going to work my way back to it and everybody can laugh at me as we get there. You talked about you can predict people's issues based on what the lowest score from the team is, but also the highest score from the team. The lowest one is probably more intuitive, right? This is the gap. This is what we don't have. So okay, more than likely there might be a mistake or an error or an opportunity here. But it might be counterintuitive to say, well, wait a minute, the strongest end can create that same results. I'd appreciate it if you could walk us through how sometimes where our strengths are actually create some of these vulnerabilities for teams.
Yeah, and let's take an individual person situation first. Like a lot of times people will say to me, what personality types are most likely to be effective in senior leadership, right? And so I will say that all four of them can be effective, but you have to be able to tap into the other ones at the right times to be able to neutralize kind of any too strong in one or the other. But a lot of people will get to senior leadership jobs because they're results driven. So that's one you see a lot more time on leadership teams. However, with every level of leadership, your ability to get results through others becomes more and more important. So if you got there with the results drive, that also could be the same thing that takes you down because you were so focused on results, you weren't taking into consideration people, you're making them feel isolated or not valued, and they end up leaving the organization, and then your results end up going down, right? So too much of anything is not necessarily a good thing, and you have to be able to leverage all four of those. As far as teams are concerned, when you think about a team that might be very, and this just happened recently, and I was working with, and this happens a lot. You get a lot of executive teams are filled with results-driven people and structured people, right? And they get results that way. But those are the two personality types that are task-focused. There's also two other personality types that are people-focused. And so what happens is if you're too task-focused as a team, you're going to steamroll people. You're not going to include people in the decision making. You're not going to spend enough time explaining the why behind things. You're just going to be focused on getting it done in a certain organized way, right? Similarly, if your leadership team is primarily people persons, or information driven, and in general you are very why focused, you could end up being great at getting people on board and excited and enthusiasm, but your execution for results is going to be weak because you don't have enough of the results and enough of the structure. And so, and if you're too strong in any of those, it just becomes overpowering and it makes it less likely to hear the voices that you need to hear. So one of the teams I work with, they have the entire organization from top to bottom go through personality assessments and, the entire leadership team go through it. And their entire leadership team knows if at this level we are really strong red, and the red is that's the results-driven personality type. If we're really strong who at the next level of leadership below us is really strong in people or information? And when we're rolling something out, how can we get them involved to make sure we don't over-result it, right? And we don't force this too fast. And so having that self-awareness and seeing that the team has those disparities, they know this going in and they go out of their way to incorporate the people who have different perspectives that get them to bring more of the people side to it.
Another great example, like you said, when you build your training programs, finding people who are more structured in order to add that into the programs that you build. We've talked a little bit about the assessments. You quoted some research earlier. So I get the feeling that data is a big driver of a lot of what you teach and how you communicate and how you, to steal a phrase, drive results, not necessarily in the way we were just talking about it with the clients that you work with. But raw data, numbers themselves can often be interpreted different ways by different people. You and I can look at the same numbers. You can use it to justify your perception. I can use it to justify mine. And we can think the other one's insane, even though we're looking at the same number sitting at the same table. I'm curious, how do you work to turn data into insights that other people can use and learn from?
Yeah, it's interesting. A lot of times when people present data, they don't spend enough time saying, why does my audience need to know this, right? And so they'll give the big picture, but why is that important? The why is so critical. And so if I show you data that says this team is not performing well on this one indicator, if you go and just say the team's not performing well on one indicator, that's nice. But if you break it down and say why are they not performing? What does the underlying data tell us, right? And so the difference between presenting data and presenting true insights is breaking it down to the one or two most important reasons why you need to know this and what you should do about it, right? So to go in and say, here's the monthly report, and you show it to them and they're like, thanks, and then you move on, not value added. But if you go in and say, here's the monthly numbers, there's 3 trends in particular I want you to notice, here's the impact of those trends, and here's what I recommend we do about it. Now you're focusing the energy on the 20% that's most important as opposed to just showing the 100%. And that's really one of the most critical things. The really effective leaders, they know that if I have 10 things I could present, I'm going to only focus on the top 2 that are going to have 80% of the impact as opposed to spending the time on the others. I'll give you a handout on the others, but I want to focus our energy on the 1 or 2 things that have the biggest impact. And to do that, you have to break the data down and figure out what is the story they're telling it, why the story is important, and What are your recommendations for people to act on that story? And when you make that connection, you help the audience feel the pain of the problem, and now they're hungry for the solution, as opposed to just giving them data and not helping them feel the pain. Then they don't really see why there's a reason to act at all.
Sure, data dumping on people. Well, great, that's all cool, but now what do I do with it? Like it's trivia. I have to figure out what's important, what's not, what should I care about, what not. And we don't have to get into attention span these days or focus. But I think even a better way to use it is to talk about it is to steal a word you used from previously, energy. Like who in the room has a lot of energy to decipher data and numbers and statistics and trends? A few people just might. A lot of people probably don't. So if we can frame it around the outcomes we're trying to achieve, like you said, present the key nuggets that make the most, frame it around the why with the recommendations to do next, far more powerful. And just like you talked about separating self-awareness versus self-perception, separating presenting data from giving insights, I think is another super important differentiation that can provide huge dividends for people when they start applying it in their conversations.
And I literally teach a class because so many people wanted it. I teach a class on how do you turn data into insights, and that's half the battle. If you really want to be persuasive, if you don't turn it into insights, you're just wasting your audience's time for the most part. If there's not something actionable, why are you showing it to them in the first place? So.
I love that.
Yeah.
If it's not actionable, why are you showing it? I love that. You just used the word persuasive, catches probably a lot of our ears right away. So whether it's purely, we're never persuasive purely using data. So I wasn't going to ask the question the right way. We're coming off of the data part of the conversation, but it goes beyond that. As you were working with leaders, I'm assuming mostly, in order to increase their persuasive effectiveness within their organizations, besides turning data into insight, what are some of the other key skills that you work with them on?
There's it's funny. Whenever I do a lot of presentation skills training for executives, right? And one of the things I always look at is how effective are they in the three means of persuasion, right? And the three means of persuasion are from Aristotle, right? But the primarily underlying, still the basis for being persuasive today is based on information who's 2,000 years old, right? And so the first thing is, do logic, right? So are you able to present in a logical, easy to follow way with strong evidence, right? And that's one key aspect of your persuasiveness. The second one is credibility. And a lot of people forget this, but if you don't establish your professional credibility and your personal credibility, professional credibility is your ability to get, to show your expertise on the subject being talked about. Personal credibility is, do I even trust you as a person? Do I like you as a person? Do I trust you as a person? And so that's a second area, is have you established credibility with your audience? And if you know them all, great, but they may not know your particular expertise on a topic you're talking about. So give a little more on that. The third area where I see people missing the most is emotional appeal. And that is, are you presenting in a way that hits your audience's hot buttons, right? And what we tend to do is we get up in front of audiences and we say, hey, and it could be the audience of one, right? If you're talking to your boss, trying to convince. But you get up there and you say, here's what I want to do and here's why I want it. No, that's not the way you approach it. What you do is say, here's what would be great for our organization because it's having this impact, and that impact has to be speaking to something your audience cares about. And you want them to feel the pain of the problem in order for them to want to take on your solution. And a lot of times people go in and say, I have a great idea. And they present the idea and everyone's like, yeah, it's a good idea, but not important. But if you had taken the time to say, hey, here's what's currently happening. Here's the pain it's causing our customers. Here's the pain it's causing our bottom line. Here's the pain of this, whatever. Now you got them like hungry, like, holy crap, we have all this pain. What are we going to do about it? Now you've spoken to the hot button, give them the answer to help address the problem. So and typically of those three things I just mentioned, we're stronger in one or two of them, but we're usually weak in one. So one, take a look at, are you creating a strong, logical, well-flowing, persuasive argument with good evidence? Two, have you established your own professional and personal credibility with your audience? And three, did you spend the time to actually customize your presentation to speak to the audience's hot buttons? You do those three things every time, you will be persuasive. But if you look at your last presentation, you'll probably figure out that one of those three things you probably missed because it's your weak area. And if you can get better in that, that's when you really start to dial up your overall influence.
Yeah, fantastic across the board. And one of the things that became painfully obvious really in the post-pandemic is leaders were struggling to navigate problems that they hadn't really had to navigate before. There was a whole list of them. We don't need to go back through what they all were. But one of the things that became painfully obvious from the outside looking in a lot of these conversations was rational solutions don't solve emotional problems. And I found room after room after room after room of leadership groups who had fallen in love with their wonderfully rational solution and for the life of them could not figure out why it wasn't solving their audience's solidly emotional problems.
Yeah.
You mentioned earlier that a lot of leadership groups, not all, are populated by more results structure driven people because that's generally what helps people work up through organizations in the first half to 2/3 of their career. I'm making a guess here, and again, if you think I'm wrong, tell me, please, that a lot of those results-driven people tend to be more logical people and tend to present things more in that rational logic way as opposed to working on hitting those emotional hot buttons. As we go back to this self-perception versus self-awareness connection, how have you helped people develop that level of self-awareness where maybe they're being too logical and they have to start working in some more of that emotional piece, even when it feels foreign to them?
Yeah. And so, when you look, anyone that has a task-focused personality type, and those are people that are more structured or more results-driven, they are the ones that are going to make the people mistakes, right? They're not going to include the right people. They're not going to spend enough time explaining the reasoning and why behind things, to help people get excited about it. That's where they'll make their mistakes. But when you're working with someone, you get them looking at the results, and I say, and literally I'll go through it. I'll say, okay, if this is your result and you're very structured and very, very logical, that would lead me to think that when you approach a problem, you're very focused on how do I get it done the fastest way I can and in the most logical order that I can, and that would be your focus. And then I say, and they'll confirm that is the case. And then I'll say, okay, so where in your past rollouts have you seen problems when you're doing a change or whatever? And inevitably, what they're going to describe is the stuff that falls into the people side of things, right? So half the battle is getting people to realize that when you have a task focus, your first most likely mistake is going to be not spending enough time getting people on board with your change. Because you're so focused on the result and so focused on how you're going to get it done, you're not thinking, who are the people that need to get behind this and drive this thing in order for it to be successful? When you look at change in general, I think it's the last time I looked at a study, 50% of all major changes in organizations fail to either fail outright or fail to meet the financial goals they were trying to do. And almost always it's because they didn't manage the people side of change. So the number one thing is getting people to realize, I get that you want a quick result, but if you want to implement a change or do something, if you really want to get that quick result, spending a little more front-end, one-time effort of getting people on board will reduce all the resistance and problems you'll have later when they weren't on board and you tried to force through it too fast, So it's in everybody's interest to stop and pause and say, yes, I know I want to get this done in a structured way, but what and how and why can I get other people to be as excited and wanting to do this so that they give extra discretionary effort as opposed to resisting it because you didn't spend enough time explaining why or including me in the process?
Yeah, it is silly as it might sound, the difference between lining the change up with their self-image versus having the change be in perceived direct conflict with their self-image at any number of levels. When we think about producers or results-driven people that work their way up into leadership roles, I'm going to choose a couple. Obviously, there's many, many, many more examples, but I'm willing to bet that if somebody was an engineer, if somebody was an accountant, if somebody had any type of design role, we could do a bunch more examples, they probably didn't want somebody rushing them. This is what I do. This is how I do it. This is my process. I want to have a great result. Yet when those results-oriented individuals get to a decision-making level, now they start rushing other people who are doing tasks to get the task done on their deadline, their way. So it's a little bit of forgetting your roots to a degree, or being overpowered by the deadline or the next step, to your point, as opposed to the people. But time will always be the enemy of empathy. And if we're not bringing the people along, like you said, we're going to continue to find ways to fail. As you were going through Aristotle's three components of persuasion earlier, you also talked about the importance of credibility, which speaks for itself. One of the tightropes that I feel like people sometimes have a difficult time walking across are balancing credibility and perceived bragging. How do you work with leaders, especially, to generate that personal and professional credibility? Because if I'm bragging about my professional credibility, you might see that, but I might have no personal credibility because it comes across as I'm just bragging. How do you help them balance the building credibility without bragging so they don't end up shooting themselves in both feet?
Yeah, and so it's about how you integrate your credibility into the story, right? And so it's one thing to get up there and list off your credentials. Like, when you watch a news program and they have an expert come on, before they open their mouth, they sit there and they rattle off all the person's credentials. They're doing that because they're trying to show you this person's an expert, and they want you to listen to them without judging them because they're already an expert, right? But at the same time, that's bragging in many ways, because they're doing this deliberately to make their audiences want to not question them. But when you're presenting your credibility, it doesn't have to be, well, I have this degree. It could be, I spent the last 6 months studying this in detail, talking to people about it, doing whatever. It's describing what you did to get to your level of knowledge without just rattling off, certificates or degrees or whatever else it is. So it's about making it part of the story. And if you have a good structural flow to your presentation, you will find ways to pepper it in that builds your credibility. Like, you could open with if you want to build your personal credibility, you can open with a story that explains your personal experience with this situation and how it impacted you. Then you can say, after having that personal experience, what I decided to do was really dig in and learn as much as I can about this. I did this, and this. So it's part of your story, as opposed to saying, I'm super smart and the expert and just listen to me, right? So a lot of times storytelling can be a key way to incorporate your credibility, both personally and professionally, without making it come across like bragging.
The phrase "pepper it in," I absolutely love.
Yeah.
If I just smack you in the face with it before I even start, maybe in the beginning, like, okay, this guy knows. And then after a while, it's like, stop, you're killing me. I don't care anymore. Okay, you think you're awesome. Can you actually help me today? But by using a more narrative format and peppering in, sometimes it's just the right phrase, the right example, it doesn't even have to be your CV, so to speak, as you go through. I think people who have their own careers, they've worked in a certain field a long time, or they have certain hobbies, whatever it is, you can tell who's involved and who's not just by the words that they use. A friend of mine here where I live has a company that the word glass is used in the title. Well, it's because he has a photography background, and people who are photographers refer to the lens as glass, which I only know because I've heard other people talk about photography. I'm not a photographer. And just recently, I happened to be standing next to them listening to some poor individual do a terrible job at manufacturing inauthentic rapport by looking at the guy's name and saying, oh, what type of glass do you manufacture? Oh, you don't manufacture? Then you must be in IT. Like, no, actually, you're failing miserably here. Just walk away now before you make it worse for yourself. So even just the right verbiage can make a huge difference. And
if I can add one other thing, talking about peppering it in, there is importance in getting that in very early in whatever you're presenting, right? Because the reason they do those things up front when they're interviewing an expert on TV is because they want to eliminate your doubt about them. If your audience doesn't know you, you may have to do a little more in the front, and you could still pepper it in your introduction. But going back to the three means of persuasion, if you are speaking in a way that touches on your audience's hot buttons, that will help your professional and your personal credibility, because they're going to be thinking, this person understands us. They understand our problem. And that's where, when you don't personalize a presentation, I can't tell you how many sales teams I've worked with where I'm helping them put together their pitches for clients. And if it feels like their pitch that they just practiced on me could be used in any situation with any client, fail.
Yeah.
Because what you're doing is you just brought a presentation to an individual that's going to make them feel like they're just doing their spiel, right? But what are you doing to pepper in all the ways you understand their issues, all the ways that your product will speak to their issues? That's when you start to develop credibility. And if you have a generic presentation, that's not going to work. You have to know your audience well enough, and you have to do your research, and then you have to speak in a way that proves that you understand their needs. That is probably the biggest credibility builder you could do, because it builds both your professional and personal credibility, because you're speaking in terms of their needs and demonstrating that you know them.
Everything you just said is critical. It's extremely critical.
Yeah.
If somebody can have the best CV in the world, but if they don't understand the person, that the audience that they're talking to, all that experience means nothing in this conversation. Our ability to resonate is often the best way we can build credibility. Leaders probably all too often default to influencing through power. And I say that in air quotes, right? I'm your boss, I'm your father, I'm your mother, do what I tell you. Again, we might have all learned that as kids, and it grew up with us. But there are many people throughout the organization levels that have to influence without authority. So while we're on this topic, and I know this is something that you spend a lot of time on as well, how do you coach people to influence leaders that might be parallel to them or above them on the org chart, or maybe even outside of the organization, where they have no real authority in the relationship?
Yeah, and I will tell you, the toughest jobs out there are people that are in lead roles, but they don't have formal authority.
Yeah.
Because they're responsible for getting results through people, but they don't have the authority to back it up. So they don't even have the option to say, hey, I'm the boss. But they need to persuade. So that's all about relationship development, right? And so are you demonstrating that you understand your audience's needs, right? And going back to, the three means of persuasion, you have to make sure you do all three of those, and none of those involve authority, right? It's, did I present it logically in a way that makes sense to them? Did I make sure that I am speaking to their needs and what's important to them? And have I established my own personal and professional credibility in the process of doing that? So you have to do those three things. They're critical if you're trying to do it without authority. Even more so, if you have some ability to be effective with questions and asking questions, because you can present questions in a way to your boss that makes them see a solution that you want them to see without telling them what to do, right? And so the coaching model that I teach others and I use all the time, it's how do you help another person guide them to see the potential pain or gain of a situation, and then the potential benefits of acting in a way differently than what they're doing now. And so a lot of times it's about asking the right questions to allow a person to discover their own answers, as opposed to telling them this is my solution, right? And sometimes when you're really effective at doing that, you don't even have to be, what you're doing is getting them to see the way that would be the best way forward without manipulating them. You're just asking questions to let them come to that conclusion on their own. So I do that a lot too, where it's situations where I don't have authority over my clients, but if I ask them the right questions, they start to see the potential for why they might want to go a certain way. So I think that's one key way to do it.
I think that's a tremendous approach. And we've all heard make it their idea. Well, a great way to make it their idea is to ask them the question, have them discover the answer, and then sometimes it comes full circle. We ask them the question, they come up with the idea, and then they tell us to go do the thing that was the right thing we wanted to do all along. Sometimes we got to put our ego aside. Well, wait, that was my idea. Who cares? We just got permission to do the thing we wanted to do, and now they're fully bought into it. So that's a tremendous approach.
Well, and one other one real quick. What I will do, if I know I'm going to be sitting down with a senior leader, CEO or something like that, if I can get input from multiple direct reports to that leader before I ever meet with them, and their ideas are incorporated, and then I'm coming to them saying, look, I met with all of your team. I spoke with each of them. Collectively, I took their ideas and I put it into, now you've got their attention, because it's not this one person trying to convince them. It's, oh, you've gotten lots of perspectives. I'm really interested to hear what you have to say. And oh, by the way, if you happen to be presenting it in front of those people, now, since you incorporated them in the process, they have a vested interest in seeing it go through. So they'll do some of the presenting for you in a sense. You can say it, and then they'll jump in And they'll say, yeah, and the reason I really liked it is because of this or whatever, because they're vested in it because you included your audience in the actual development of the presentation. So to your point, if your ego is, I'm going to go show them what the right answer is, you're setting yourself up for failure. But if you can include them in coming up with the right answer, now they have a vested interest in seeing that thing go through, and it's more likely they're going to sustain the change because they were part of it in the first place.
Amen. The question I have in mind isn't a great question because everything is so contextually based, person, situation, goal, problem, all of those things. Are there general questions or framework of questions that you feel like work consistently in those types of scenarios?
Yeah, and so for me, there's a model that I have that that basically starts with, first is understanding the problem or the goal, right? So questions around getting clear on what are we trying to achieve? Because a lot of times people won't say that up front. They'll know they have a problem. They'll start venting, and you say, okay, stop for a second. Let me just see, when we're done with this conversation, what is the outcome you want to achieve, and what is the problem that you're trying to solve, and get that clear. Then you get clarifying questions, that go down to the root cause of what the issue is, or the root of what would solve and make that goal happen. The third piece of it is pain or gain, is what I say. And really it's about, okay, you've gotten them aware of the problem. You've dug down to the point that they have a deeper understanding themselves of the issue. And a lot of times when they come to you, they haven't thought it through. They just know they have an issue, or they know they have a need to achieve a certain outcome, but they haven't thought through the detail. You get them to the point where they really understand the issue. But then what a lot of people do is they skip the pain or gain. And the pain or gain is, so what would happen if this continues to happen? What would be the outcomes? And they start to list out the bad things that would happen. Or you say, what would be the possibilities? If this was resolved tomorrow, what would be different? And get them feeling the gain. Now what you've done is you've gotten them twice as motivated to solve the problem because you just made them feel the pain or the gain. And that, a lot of times people, when you're coaching someone else, you'd be like, you hear the problem, you understand the problem, and you're like, oh, I have a great idea. And you jump right to solutions. That is not getting that person on board. And what you need to do is get them to feel the pain or gain before you come up with solutions. Then you need to ask questions to see if they can come up with a solution so it's theirs instead of yours, right? And so then it's exploring possible solutions and then asking questions to help them narrow it down to the solution they want. And then it becomes, okay, well, how would you implement that, right? So it's defining the problem, getting a real deep understanding of the problem and the root cause and or the goal, making them feel the pain or gain, identifying possible solutions, and again, through questions, so they're coming up with all this. And then at the very last stage, it's, well, how do you think you would want to implement this? What would be the next steps you would take? But that whole time, I've done that with my bosses, and all I'm doing is helping them come up with a solution. And they're appreciative because they haven't really taken the time to go through this because they're dealing with 20 things at once, right? And you're helping them think through the whole thing. And then they come out feeling more confident in themselves because they came up with it, not you. All you did was ask the right questions to help them get there.
All great examples, and hopefully it didn't skip past people. A great nod to emotional intelligence, because you mentioned that leaders are often working on at least 20 other things. So the fact that they came to us and didn't think the problem or the issue all the way through, it's easy for us to be offended or upset about that because you came to me fully upset but half-baked with the problem, the idea, the issue, and now you're throwing it in my lap. Instead of being upset about that, increase my level of self-awareness, raise my level of emotional intelligence, now walk through this questioning process in order to get the detail, the buy-in, the extra insights from them, and start moving forward together. So that was a wonderful example there that unintentionally, we didn't set it up on purpose, wrapped everything together. I'm keeping an eye on the clock, man. You have dropped so much knowledge on us and squeezed so many great ideas into this conversation. For people that are listening to this and like, I want to stay connected with Michael, I want to continue to learn more, where can they go to connect with you, to find your book, to read your material, to learn more?
Yeah, you can start by going to, so my last name is deLisser, DeLisser, and deLisserconsulting.com is my website. You could also get there just by going to deLisser.com. When you go there, you could see more about my background. There is a link there to the book that I recently published, which is called Leadership Accelerators, and it focuses on high impact skills, communication skills that improve relationships and results. So that book is out there. That's on Amazon, so you can go check that out. But the link to it is at my website. I post a lot on LinkedIn, and I have a YouTube channel. If you just go to YouTube and look up deLisser Consulting, or deLisser Leadership Consulting, you will find my YouTube channel. And I post lots of snippets from podcasts like this, full podcast, this one when we're done. I'll put a link to it there. But it's a way that I can give people little bits at a time. When I break it into the snippets, they can have one lesson a day for 2 minutes, listen to this and go out and apply it, right? And so that's out there too. And if you can connect with me on LinkedIn, I regularly, 2 or 3 times a week, I'm posting either articles on leadership or on communication or on change management or self-awareness. I'm just constantly posting out there as well.
Awesome. Well, I'll put all of those links in the show notes so people don't have to go hunting for them. They can just get them right here and connect with you right away. Man, I've really enjoyed this conversation. Thank you so much. I really appreciate you sharing your time and expertise together. I can't wait to share this with everybody else. And I look forward to staying in touch and continuing to learn from you.
Thanks. I'll just say one last thing.
Please.
The process that I use to work with anyone to overcome these habits or things that they want to work on, it all starts with increasing your self-awareness. And usually self-assessment can help with that. And then giving you alternative behaviors that you can use. So when you start getting good at catching yourself, you can replace it with these behaviors, and then helping them figure out how to create new patterns and habits going forward to replace the old behaviors. The book is laid out exactly like that. Almost every chapter has a self-assessment, things you can do to improve, and then steps you can take to develop a new habit around that. If you can follow that process, you can really work on these things, but you have to be patient with yourself, because if you're working on communication skills and it's a habit, it will not go away overnight. You have to spend time on it, and daily focus is what's going to make the difference. Even if it's 5 minutes a day practicing something, over time, you'll start to see results when you make sure that you're doing it daily, because you do not get rid of a habit unless you create a new one, and that takes daily focus.
It takes much longer to create a good habit than it did to get the bad habit rolling to begin with.
Yeah, and the book is Leadership Accelerator. So if you want to go check it out, you could do that. Otherwise, just focus on anything we covered in this presentation today, and you'll have some great ideas. So
now we'll have the link. They'll get right to the book. I'll make sure the link is here. I really appreciate everything, man. Thank you so very much. It was a great conversation. I look forward to talking with you soon.
Thanks for having me on. It was a great time.
My pleasure. Michael, thank you for the fantastic conversation. I really appreciate the education, all that you shared. Thank you so much. I really loved that disassociation technique for receiving feedback. I'm gathering it now to give to myself later. Amazing. I also really like exploring the difference between self-awareness and self-perception, some of the specific question examples that you gave, all tremendous. Thank you so very much. And of course, thank you to all of you who were here for another episode this week. We appreciate you coming back week after week. Thank you so very much. Hopefully you took just as many notes and got as much out of that program as I did today. Thank you. While you're online, please just take a quick second and visit our sponsors. Head over to humantel.com. That's where you can learn more about developing the skill set necessary to understand when people's emotions are likely shifting by recognizing changes in their body language and nonverbal communication. Explore their online course catalog and enter the code INQUASIVE25 for 25% off the best-in-class online training of your choice at humantel.com. For the professional interviewers, please head over to certifiedinterviewer.com. That's where you can learn more about both the Certified Forensic Interviewer designation and the International Association of Interviewers. Get all your questions answered, qualification, participation, what it means for your career, about both over at certifiedinterviewer.com. And finally, while you're online, please check out inquasive.com. That's where you can learn more about the programs that our clients ask us to custom facilitate for their senior leaders, sales teams, HR teams, and more to teach them the techniques required to unlock hidden value in all of their high impact conversations. We appreciate you being here for another week. Thank you so very much. Please, before you go, take a quick second, like the show, subscribe to it. Please share it with your network. And of course, leave us your feedback. We would love to hear from you. Thank you all. Stay safe. Take care of each other. And we'll see you next time.